Why, hello, it is I, Chris Brogan. How the heck are you? Welcome back to a Chris Brogan Media News for August 25th. When I say news, what I'm doing is I go through a fairly extensive ritual every morning of looking through a bunch of different sources, reading all kinds of information, and then seeing how that might or might not be interesting, and whether or not it's useful or something I want to pass on to you. So I thought, why not turn that into a live show using this cool app, Ecamm Live, to broadcast it to you on Facebook Live so that you could read along in the news with me. So what I'm drinking this morning is a little cold brewed coffee. How about you? What are you having? Hi, Nikki. And I am also curious to note what I have something interesting to talk about with regards to cold brew coffee in just 1 second. One other thing I want to point out, this is just a random interesting product. I sent away in Amazonville a essential oils lavender spray. My kids, both of them, were having a little bit of trouble sleeping, and we're coming to the end of summer. They're going to go to school next week or the week after or whatever, and I wanted to try out this thing where they say that if you spray their pillows with lavender oil, it's going to really help. And I don't know if it 100% did, but I think we all had a lot better sleep last night, and it's lavender oil. So it's essential oils. It smells like that. It smells a tiny bit alcohol-y, which is kind of funny to me, but I guess that's maybe the delivery method. But I've got a link for that. I will, as the show goes on, I will have links for everything that I talk about in the show notes that come on chrisbrogan.com. If you ever want to go find them for yourself, though, you can always go to chrisbrogan.com/CBM for Chris Brogan Media, and then the date that we're covering. So, I've got that thing going on where I'm not showing my right screen again. Hang on 1 minute. Let's see. There we go. I made it work. So go to chrisbrogan.com/CBM082517 and you're going to see the notes for today's broadcast. Let's see. Hello, Brian. Good to see you. Brian says that the lavender oil thing worked really, really, really well. Nikki says cold coffee, but only because I forgot I brewed myself a hot cup. I'm a big fan of the cold brew. Fresh ground Blue Mountain coffee. Oh, Mike, don't make me jealous like that. Don't make me jealous. All right, so we talked about the lavender essential oil. Then I talked about what we were drinking. But this is why, because there's a beverage trends report from Google data that says customers are really getting into cold brew coffee. Super high demand according to Google's insights. And I'll tell you that that's interesting to me because I like cold brewed coffee, especially when I learned out it was ridiculously easy to make. I'm not one of those weird, religion of coffee people, but I love my coffee. So I figured out, what does it take? So all you do is I have a French press coffee machine. I throw the appropriate amount of scoops of coffee in. I throw the amount of cold water in, stir it until it's nice and stirred. I put it in the fridge for a couple hours, like 3, 4, 5 hours. And then I come back and kapow, cold brewed delicious coffee. It's my favorite way to make iced coffee now. So I throw some cubes, I throw a little almond milk. What's not to love, right? So cold brewed coffee turns out to be one of their biggest things. It says, what's interesting is, though, it went from a scrappy DIY trend to a mainstream staple. So I found that very interesting. The other thing that was really kind of interesting is that there was a very interesting uptick in flavors like matcha and all that. And so that earthy things like dandelion, turmeric, and chamomile, even parsley, is a big thing. So it's very interesting to watch this. And so it's very, this is from Google's thinkwithgoogle.com site. Very interesting stuff. Raul reports lavender always worked really well with Daniela as well. And yes, I bet you drink a lot of that in the tropics, Raul. So, as you may or may not know, I am very, very interested in conversation technologies like She Who Shall Not Be Named, Alexa, which, by the way, I have to tell you, that's how I got, my lavender oil. I just yelled over to her, hey, get me some of this. And she goes, here's like the best one. I was like, okay, fine, that one, right? So there's this report that Google and or Mozilla are really trying to work hard to make this kind of voice data for conversational technologies available to more people so that they can crowdsource that data. So the voice recordings is going to help a lot of people. The project is, one of the projects is called Common Voice. and there are a lot of others. And so there's a whole bunch of artificial intelligence DIY stuff on the go. Very interesting, reported by Fast Company. So again, these links are always going to be available at chrisbrogan.com. You could go to chrisbrogan.com and click on, I pushed the wrong button. chrisbrogan.com. You can see them, the most recent ones, but if you need to go back, just chrisbrogan.com/CBM and then the date. So that'll get you going to where you need to go. All right, so next up in the news, I found this is kind of interesting. Have you ever watched or looked at, Humans of New York? Have you looked at their Instagram site or whatever? I think Humans of New York is one of the most interesting things going. There's always a great story. I'm always curious. I always want to know a little bit more. Well, evidently it's coming to Facebook TV. So not unlike I'm using Ecamm Live to shoot this, they're going to do a real film production kind of a thing and make a TV production of Humans of New York for Facebook TV, as reported to The Verge. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I think it's going to be interesting what kinds of Instagram stars and what kinds of other media stars may or may not translate to video. I mean, we all have a friend in Gary Vaynerchuk who is kind of, one of the forerunners of doing things like Wine Library TV, where he said, I think it'd be cool to do my own wine show long before anybody thought this was cool. But it's now interesting to see some of these transitions. I reported very briefly yesterday in talking about Ethan and Hila Klein, H3H3 on YouTube. I found it very interesting that they're just now getting into podcasting. I was into podcasting in 2005 and just never really took it too high. But I feel like it's interesting that these multi-million YouTube viewer people are now branching out into other mediums. You've got to pay attention to this. The mixed media future is 100%. It's just 100%. And I'm finding more and more stories like that. It's definitely worth taking a look at. This next story is a little depressing for me. I always forget because I'm in the land of business and also mostly online business. It's very interesting to me that because the U.S. government has a bunch of sanctions, we have a new problem where Apple had to take a bunch of their Iranians' apps off of the Apple Store. So one of them is called Snap with an extra P. One's called Delian Foods. There's all these other things that all these Iranians use that now cannot be viewed or used because the government said to Apple, hey, you got to take those out. I get it. I get that businesses have to follow the law. I think there's a lot of circumstances where it's a lot of businesses trying to push past the law in a bad way. And I think that what's sad about this is in countries, this is a very U.S. perspective, but the countries that we don't know much about, the countries that we don't have a lot of connection to, the countries where we've had so many sanctions for so long, I think it would be nice to have sort of a without borders feeling for something as simple as a food delivery app. Pretty sure that's not going to change anything, especially to the negative or whatnot. I think that there's a lot of opportunities to grow and learn about cultures, and why not learn about cultures through their apps? I think it's a very unfortunate circumstance that that's what's going on in that world. Checking out comments really quickly. Back to the newsroom, says Don. Hi, Don, by the way. Brian's going to see Gary next week in Frankfurt at the conference that you're opening and he is closing. Hey, I'd want to go in that order myself if I had to be up against Mr. V on a stage. I like opening conferences more than closing them anyway because I feel like I seem like I set the tone for the day whether or not I do. All right. So, hey, Harry Coles. How mushrooms could repair our crumbling infrastructure. As you may or may not know, I've been eating a lot more plant-based lately. I've been following this kind of news, but this is interesting because this is a business impact story about, it looks like for a long, long time we've been trying to solve the problem of how do we make our roadways repair themselves, especially because we're in a circumstance where it's costing us over, infrastructure costs are over $4 trillion in lost business in the coming years. And I think it's really interesting that some materials found naturally in mushrooms, and especially kind of mushroom waste, fungal matter, might be the key to making self-repairing roads. And I think that that's a pretty interesting thing. We've wanted to do this for a very long time, we the people. And I think that it's very interesting that we have this opportunity to deliver possibly self-fixing roads. Thank you, mushrooms. And besides the fact that we get a chance to grow them. You had me at mushrooms. Yes, and I vividly remember Oslo. I think that was the time we spent the most time together, Brian, which is actually pretty interesting. This next news story is, the title is, it's interesting to me because Inc. magazine made a kind of a big deal out of a specific tweet. And it says, Elon Musk's best PR campaign to date happened, and you may not have noticed. But what it is he put this tweet and he says, just received verbal government approval for the Boring Company to build an underground New York City to Philadelphia to Baltimore to D.C. Hyperloop, New York to D.C. in 29 minutes. And what they're saying is the biggest thing you should pay attention to is just that one little detail of New York to D.C. in 29 minutes. The point being that in that little tiny phrase, that standalone headline is the basic software kernel of what the message is. That the message is something that you can pass along really quickly. And so that's the reason I highlighted this article. It's not necessarily, I think it's actually kind of, fake news would be the wrong term, but I think it's a very misleading title. But the point is, the opportunity to learn how to boil down the thing you need to tell people is much, much, much more important than it's ever been, and it's just going to continue to be more important. On that, a personal news note, I've reached out to try to interview Manoj Bhargava, who founded 5-Hour Energy Drink. 4 hour. It's the 4-hour work week plus 5-Hour Energy. Manoj Bhargava from 5-Hour Energy, who also now runs a very important charity called Billions and Change. And I reached out because I have a whole chapter of my upcoming book, Multiplier, titled 5-Hour Energy or What's Your 5-Hour Energy or whatever, because of the story that he said in, I listened to this on, I think it was called How I Made That, Guy Raz's podcast, where he was talking about how he wanted to just figure out what to name this little product that he was selling that gave you an energy boost. And he said, well, I liked 5-Hour Energy, but I thought maybe I wasn't really that smart. So I hired some marketing consultants, and they came in and they told me it should be called something like Zip Zap or something. And he said, we decided not to go with that. We went with 5-Hour Energy because the name of the product is the benefit you get. So it kind of works out that way. I think a light bulb went off, and I've been talking about it endlessly since. And you and I really have to distill our 5-Hour Energy for what our business is and how we do what we do. And in messaging in general, we've got to cut some of the fat out. I've been looking at the way we message and market and communicate as grown-ups, and I think that we've got to look down and see what's going on in sort of the up-and-coming crowd. I mean, I learn more about what may or may not be effective messaging from my 11 and my 15-year-old and my 12-year-old, soon-to-be 13 stepdaughter. I can tell you that what they teach me far surpasses what I learned in big-time marketing spaces, because I'm just pretty sure we are doing it wrong. So I have a couple more news articles to go, 2 more, in fact. This one is just interesting. This is reported in The Economist that it's been a really good summer of progress for women in the Arab world. Now, when I went to share this article, I started thinking, I got to say up front, of course there's a lot more to go. Of course, women's rights aren't really where they need to be. Blah, blah, blah. We need tons more stuff. And not blah, blah, blah in a dismissive way. There's just a lot to be said about this. But it is interesting to say that there's a lot of progress being made around. There's some new rules. There's a honor killings sentencing rule that changed. There's one about what was called as the marry your rapist law. There's all kinds of laws that are in effect that you maybe don't even know about. It's really worth going to chrisbrogan.com just to click this link to read through the rest of this thing to see. But what I very much appreciate is that there's been some forward progress on this. And I think that in all religions, any religions, I think trying to find the progress and make it a much better progressive circumstance is vitally important. And I'm just excited that there's been some ground made, because I always think that when we gain ground, there's a chance to gain even more. And congratulations on getting some of these things moved a little bit closer to where they need to go. That's what I want to say. Nikki says, for podcasting, is it still hot since you started 12 years ago? I know. Sounds like TV channels are the shift. So I'd say, Nikki, that the thing is you got to kind of maybe consider doing both. I still have a podcast. It's called The Owner's Mind right now. There may be a new podcast coming shortly. There will be a new podcast coming shortly. But I think visual matters as well. But, I mean, listen to this format, right? I have a beautiful, handsome head. I know that. Look at this luxurious hair. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful. But you could get all this just by listening to me as well. And me scrolling an image in the background isn't going to change that either. So I think there's a benefit to both. But what's great about podcasting is that there's people who have commutes. There are people who have little kids in the house, and they might just want to keep one earbud in, and they can let the kid listen to whatever kids are watching these days. Barney probably isn't it. And you can do something better with your time. There's people at the gym. There's all that sort of a thing. So I think that there's a lot of benefit to podcasting, and I think there's still a lot of growth to be had, and it's definitely worth considering, Nikki. And, because some people, I'll tell you the one thing that is, people are still persisting, but it's losing a lot more steam. Reading. The U.S. Department of Labor and Statistics reported that people are reading on average 19 minutes a day. That 19 minutes a day includes email, text, everything, blogs, etc., and books. So if you're trying to get your message out in text, you are competing with all of those other services for 19 minutes. You're not competing with some other really popular blog. You're competing with humans' interest in looking at text. By the way, Floyd Mayweather and Conor McGregor are having a famous fight between a professional boxer and a UFC leader, belt holder. There's been a whole lot of stuff floating around that I guess Floyd Mayweather can't read. It's been this weird fight back and forth, and 50 Cent, the rapper 50 Cent, has been on Floyd Mayweather about this for years, sort of calling him out for the fact that he's all that rich and whatever, but he can't read. Kind of weird. Kind of interesting, though, that that's a thing. There's a meme about it. That's how I know about it. All right, last, more than 50% of digital media time now spent within 5 mobile apps. This is interesting, especially because they broke it out by ages, because I was immediately suspect of this whole thing because I wanted to know about the ages. Probably number one by far, but sort of a tie, is Maps, instant messenger type apps, and music apps. So as a category, those are the ones. Right next is photo, then weather, then games. Kind of makes sense, right? Very interesting where you follow. And Nikki, absolutely. Conor McGregor, I really hope he takes out Mayweather. Absolutely no racial reason for that, except I do happen to be Irish, but just because I think Mayweather is not exactly the nicest guy. I wish there were an even nicer guy fighting him, but what can I say? So here's the breakdown by age. This is YouTube is number one, age is 18 to 24. I can vouch that it's probably number one in our household, and ages 11 through 15 as well. Facebook is number 2, it says, for 18 to 24. I have a weird feeling about that one. Snapchat number 3, Facebook Messenger, then Instagram. I mean, it's not like you guys can't read. What's interesting is that once you get over 24 years old, Google Maps becomes your 5th choice no matter what. And I can probably vouch for that as well. So very interesting stats. I thought you'd find that interesting. That's reported by the people over at Marketing Land. Marketing Land is probably my favorite, and Search Engine Land, probably my favorite place to read about marketing and whatnot, because it's almost always about really good science, really good information, and never about just random boring opinions and, do these 5 things to change your life. When I do this project, the way I do it, I already told you about how I use Ecamm to do the video. So if you want to check out cbrogan.me/Ecamm Live, it is an inexpensive way to shoot Facebook Live. Not only once you're finished on this Facebook Live, you push a button and it'll lob this thing at YouTube, for instance. Very interesting stuff. You get the file, so you can put it anywhere. You can put a video file, right? But the other piece of the puzzle that I use to create this is I use Feedly. So Feedly is a news gathering tool, and it allows you to sort and whatever. And so the way I work with Feedly is I just kind of roll through and I take a look and see what's interesting, and then I start collecting it and sharing it for you. So every single time I look through this, I have to sort through, is this article going to be something worth it for you? And it's funny how even as much as I try to push my best efforts forward and make the very best sorting and unsubscribe from sources that aren't very interesting, it's amazing how many people are still writing those boring ass, do these 12 things to be a better leader kind of articles. It's so depressing. We're going to end the news report here, but in the next few minutes, if you are here live, please, if you are reading or following some particularly interesting story, I would love to know about it. You can send them to me directly, chris@chrisbrogan.com. You can dump them right into the comments section, because I think people watching this might also want to see what you've got going on. And again, I want to just finish by saying, if you want to go and check out the stories that I covered here, I'll put this link below just as soon as we finish this broadcast. But you can go to chrisbrogan.com/CBM for Chris Brogan Media, 082517, and you can get all of the links to all of the stuff that I've shared with you today. Thank you so much for your time. I'm really grateful that you showed up, and I hope this has been interesting. I'm going to keep sort of varying up the times of day that I do this, but it's usually sometime shortly after I've shared the news inside what I want to get out of it for business. I just want to make sure you have something for you as well. Hey, thanks so much for your time. Really good talking with you today. Catch you later.